3, 2, 1.
Very hard to do in Los Angeles right now as an art major, as an artist.
I'm here in Brisbane, Australia, and catching up with Max Presneill, who was one of the first artists I interviewed for StudioCrasher in 2012. So, hello, Max.
Hello.
Well, let's I suppose firstly talk about where your work is now, as opposed to where it was 2012.
Mm-hmm.
When
I guess the biggest change is that it's become entirely abstract, which is a huge jump, and the jump occurred essentially in trying to get the viewer to pay attention to the fundamentals of the painting, rather than be distracted by some of the characters and trying to fit them into, well, I know which painting or where that's from, and I found it was just getting way too distracting. So I removed the figures, and then the mark making itself becomes the focal point.
So, because when I look at the new works that you've done, it is very much about not just abstraction, but it is very much about mark making. Mm-hmm. What is it about mark making that you're attempting to get to?
Well, essentially it's about marks of presence. I mean, they become motifs and sign pointers towards the idea of marks of presence. They are literally marks of presence, but then they're indicators of things. So they talk about the language of painting. So there's, as an example, gestural marks, but then the gestural marks are often encompassed in some way by the equivalent visual equivalent of quotation marks in one way or another, so that we're being very self-reflexive about how these work and how they work in art history, and how they work in terms of referencing outside sources like graffiti and comic books and all these other things that help inform the sets of marks. And they've become a kind of multi-layered sets of ideas which change from day to day on which particular idea I'm kind of more focused on. I see them as being political, but I'm not always standing in front of them thinking politics. They're about mortality, but I'm not thinking about death all the time either. It depends on what I bring to the studio on a particular day, which will kind of direct the kind of steps and counter steps that are engaged with in making the painting.
Where does the title come from?
Well, they're nearly all called redact or redactions or whatever, but or now they're all called RD to even cut it down more succinctly now. It came about from the stuff that was going on in America about the government and information Snowden and Manning. That's where there was all this talk, and I just thought it was really interesting how the government does this thing of crossing out information, literally crossing it out, and how in my neighbourhood, when the gangs put graffiti up, then the council comes out the next day and they repaint over it in a slightly wrong colour in this really interesting way. So all these kind of things that I was interested in, the need that graffiti reflects, and then these political aspects of coverage, suppression, oppression, the need to restate somebody's existence, their presence, what they're saying. So it's this constant battle between being erased and having these presence, markers of presence. And so it really came to, it was just this perfect moment of that starts talking about all the things I'm talking about in the right way. So it's political, it directs the viewer towards the political understanding of what they might be, but it also references these other things. And I like I think the word itself is kind of interesting, because it is this kind of just, not even political sense, the idea of removal in itself kind of relates to, well, the removal of the individual, and that's what, if that element of being about mortality is the paintings are very much about being alive, but they're about being alive because of the potential of death. And that kind of being as you can't talk about death directly, well, they talk indirectly about, with bright colours and gesture remarks or whatever, what it means to be alive, knowing that what we're talking about is the removal that's going to happen at some point. So it came together with language and a more evenly distributed set of ideas now. I think they're equally about all of these elements at the same time.
Yeah, it seems to me that now, because they're very abstract and also the surfaces are quite textured because they've been repainted and repainted and repainted.
Yeah.
It seems to me that there's an element of the indexical in there, if that
Absolutely.
makes sense.
No, absolutely.
And that then makes me think of, the sort of Roland Barthes camera lucida idea that, photograph essentially captures someone's death. Photograph of a person captures a moment, and it's also, the shadow of that is that it also captures the inevitability of them disappearing.
Yeah. It's funny because there's a bunch of things that became more and more apparent with this, which is the place of the performative act in this thing becomes. It's become an interesting question for me. How much are these about the performative actions that are going on, and this is an artifact left from that? But the marks themselves, because they are both metaphorical and literal, this is a mark. And it's not about something, it's not an illustration of something, it is this mark. But of course they're always metaphorical, because then there's these extended discussions that go beyond what's right in front of you. So I'm finding it really interesting that there's so many moments of contradiction in how they're supposed to be read. These aren't accidents, that's now become very deliberate part of what they're about.
Did you, the opening was last night, and you must have talked to a lot of people about the work.
I did.
Because that's what opening.
That's what they're for.
That's what they're there for. Did you, let me ask this differently. How did you find people read those? Because, of course, this is something I'm really interested in myself from the kind of art and war point of view as well. Is this issue to do with aesthetics and politics, particularly with abstraction, being enmeshed? There seems to be, a lot of people make the assumption that either something is aesthetic or it's political, and the two can't come together, where, obviously to people like Jacques Rancière, there's, there's the two sides of the same coin, rather. How did you find people last night when you spoke to them about the work, read them?
I think people tend to read them with a heavy reliance on their interest. So if they're interested in the political, that's what they see and talk about. If they're interested in grand themes, death and whatever, then that's the kind of areas that. And sometimes they'll talk about it in the history of art. It's kind of where they tend to be. For me, they're equally about all of these things. But I think people, like, as we know people do, is they will lean towards their own interests and that kind of thing. So the interesting thing about them, I think, is when talking to people, is that it always amazes me how much kind of research, like people who buy my work, they can tell you stuff, they've read the stuff and they've kind of done this research work. So they tend to know a fair bit about what the works are about. And how they can be read, which is always gratifying. But they're these aren't hugely difficult topics. I mean, they can get into the weeds a bit when it starts. Well, Wittgenstein's language games and blah blah blah. But essentially, they're not very. This isn't going to. I'm not going to win a Nobel Prize over this. So I mean, if you can. Appreciate them for one of the or many of the potential meanings and aesthetically have an experience. The reading of it can be varied, but I think that's kind of typical of anything. Like when I watch Blade Runner, I watch Blade Runner with a subtext about my own art through it, and I know I do it.
Yeah.
And I think people do the same thing.
Yeah, I suppose you bring to it what, you know.
Yeah, your own
What you
interests and the things about it that appeal to you. Which is, I wouldn't be, I'm not open-ended about my paintings. They're not, well, it'd be anything you want to see, and that's not how they are. If somebody said, well, I see dolphins, I would say you're an idiot. Or if somebody said, it's the sound of U2 in there, I'd say, no, you're an idiot. Because there's no sound of U2 music in there. But anyway, there is a certain amount of latitude that you can give to people, but as long as it's kept within certain kind of discussions, because I think one of the ways that one hopefully takes a rigorous enough approach to them that you recognise when they might stray too far from the central themes, and redirect them so that they kind of come back to that discussion.
One of the things I found an aesthetic and painterly kind of level quite interesting about them was that the backgrounds are all actually, there's an interplay between the background and the mark making motifs. Namely that the background is actually, seems to be the last thing that's painted on there.
Yeah, mostly. Yeah. The background is used essentially to try and unify this kind of surface which has a lot of stuff going on in it normally. And so I use that last process to unify the canvas and to provide a really strong editing process in there. So I'm looking at this thing, there's too much on there, and I know I want to cut down as much as I can, keep the essentials, and that allows me to do that, and then go back into it with a few more things on the surface if needed, which it normally does, because you want to get rid of a lot. I mean, I really want to edit out and get it to a certain kind of strong graphic-y feel often. I like that kind of, I mean, I I started making art as a kid through comic books, and I think there's a kind of, it's my first language, as it were. So yeah, I think that's never really gone away. I've learnt more languages, painting languages and art history languages, but there's elements like that I don't think go away.
It's a very reductive process as well, isn't it? Because it's like you're putting so much in there, and then you're actually taking. It's a little bit like a kind of an old-fashioned sort of sculptor approach where you have
taking away everything that shouldn't be there. I mean, it's an interesting, for me, of course, it's an interesting process because it has fail-safes, if you like, in terms of that allow a certain amount of freedom to occur in terms of like going nut, doing whatever you like, because you don't need to worry whether you're going to mess it up, because you've always got this end approach, which is edit. And I'm a huge believer that if you want to make strong work, one of the strongest skills you can develop is how to edit, because it requires being really self-critical and understanding that the painting is going to need certain things that you as an artist don't. In some way, there's a separation. It has the requirements to make a good painting. And so there's a lot of that kind of distancing or that kind of vigorous way of looking at it. I think that is useful to the paintings.
When we did the first interview in LA in 2012, I remember one of the things that has stuck in my mind is you saying was the effect of when the painting's still in the studio, it's fair game. Yeah,
still and true.
Yeah.
Nothing if it's in the studio. It's still it's potential. I'm working on it. I'll tell you what's been interesting though since then is that I started taking photographs of the work for the website and for galleries and whoever needed images. And I started adjusting the colour or cropping out edges, or after I've taken the photographs and we've gone to say for one of the catalogues, then I paint on top of it again, so that there's what's being seen in reproduction is never the same thing as what they actually look like.
Right.
Quite deliberately all the time.
So with this current body of work, the reproductions that are on the website, are they slightly different?
They're all slightly different. Everything's slightly different. If you're careful, then you have the website in front of you, you can check, like, oh,
Yeah.
it's cut an inch off of the left-hand side,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. And sometimes quite a bit. There's a lot of that kind of stuff going on in all of them. All little things added, and sometimes quite drastically things have been added. I mean, to the point where I've had to retitle them and retake shoots because shoot them because the changes got too many, too big or too influential. Then they become another painting.
Yeah. But have you ever had anyone go, "Hey, I really like this"?
Yes.
And it's no longer there.
And it's that. Sorry, that one's no longer available.
You can have the
Strip
painting
it down.
extra, man.
Here's a knife. Get in there. So no, that was that kind of happens on occasion.
Yeah.
And I've had this happen before when somebody's saying they're kind of looking at it, and it's somebody that's familiar with the work, but they've only ever seen it, reproduced. And it can not everyone. In fact, most people don't notice, but occasionally somebody will say, "That's not like the painting." I had a collector talk to me about that last night. They were saying, that image that you've got, I saw on your of the painting that I own on your website. It's not like mine. And I said, yeah. If you actually read, if you read onto the page about what I do, it has a section on there about everything's being changed. Nothing that in reproduction is the same as what they are in real life. Which came about from a conversation with some artists that I had about some younger artists making works for Instagram.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, that's not the experience. Instagram is not the experience, It's a picture. And I wanted to make sure that the paintings always existed separately from that kind of approach, that these aren't, it looks great on my phone, it doesn't look like that.
And in fact, the big difference between when you see it in reproduction on a TV, on a computer screen, I realised last night, because I looked at the works that are on the gallery's website, and then at the opening I realised how much more texture there actually is, because they've been painted over and painted over.
Yeah.
There's so much, the texture is actually, for want of a better word, is kind of quite grungy, isn't it? It's really quite rough and
Yeah. I don't personally, I don't like the texture. So that part of it is something I just have to put up with.
Right.
That's what happens when you paint over and over and over and over, again. But it's not something I actually enjoy myself.
Yeah.
A lot of people do like that part of them, but I find it a little irritating. I do. I guess in my head, the only mark, you should be able to see the movement of the hand maybe, but I'd be perfectly okay with it if they were completely flat. It's impossible to do that. I mean, the whole point is that they're this ongoing process, and that some of those paintings take years, which sounds so stupid to me. It really does. I mean, how could it possibly take years to do that? Well, because you're redoing it constantly. It's never quite right until at some point it happens. Which, no, don't ask me. I don't have no idea when that point is.